The body and soul of America's geoeconomic schisms and global leadership brought out by COVID-19 and protests in honor of George Floyd. I'm Rob Kep. This is my take on the United States is recognized for and frequently takes pride in its global leadership. Top-ranking statistic certainly no one in the U.S. is bragging about is its world-leading number of novel coronavirus deaths, which currently exceed 100,000. The next highest number of deaths comes from Britain, yet with less than 40% of the toll in human life suffered. American suffering is statistically mitigated when viewed from the number of COVID deaths per million of population. Factoring in the U.S.'s much larger population of nearly 330 million, it actually managed COVID better than the UK and other leading European nations, with some notable exceptions such as Germany and the Nordic states, excepting Sweden. Yet this relative success is hardly an unqualified endorsement of how well American authorities responded to COVID. The Trump administration continually dismissed the severity of the threat posed by COVID before the nation experienced a tragic upward curve of deaths. In addition to the human toll, latest projections from the Congressional Budget Office estimate that because of long-term effects of reductions in consumer spending and investment, the loss to the United States between 2020 and 2030 will be $7.9 trillion. So America's body politic is noticeably suffering in terms of personal as well as economic welfare. Profound irony to these times is that while the death of thousands from COVID has kept people at home, the death of one man, George Floyd, has sent thousands to the streets to protest the injustice of his murder by 4 Minneapolis policemen. Along with peaceful protest, violent demonstrations, destruction, and looting has broken out across more than 200 American cities. The outrage over George Floyd's death has spread to countries around the world, grieving his death and showing solidarity with the American Black Lives Matter movement. The encouraging twist to the impact of the protest in America is that while the violence has been receding, an increasing number of local police forces have been pledging spiritual support to the protesters, hugging protest leaders and symbolically taking a knee against violence on blacks, a gesture whose political connotations made something like that unthinkable previously. So while George Floyd undeniably suffered a horrible and inexcusable death, the overall response to his murder in America's body politic is showing cathartic value. The key is that this spiritual awakening be accompanied by concrete policies to address the underlying problems. The speed at which America has historically addressed racial injustice has been slow, yet it has nevertheless progressed in positive directions. Over 50 years ago, legislation like the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and Voting Rights Act of 1965 laid the groundwork for a more racially equitable society. Other legislation like the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965 directed America's immigration intake from Europe to Latin America and Asia, further diversifying its population base and enhancing its human capital pool. Summing this up from a geoeconomic perspective, while the U.S. has faltered in its handling of COVID-19, on balance, it's performed reasonably well compared to its Western peers. The nearly $8 trillion long-term hit to U.S. economic output is significant, but not insurmountable if the nation improves with future responses to health crises and continues to innovate biopharmaceutical and other technological solutions. America's intellectual, spiritual, and ethnic diversity is without question one of its greatest strengths. Discussions around the sheer economic powers of diversity will be left to other video installments. Here I just want to leave you with a graph that shows how U.S. economic output fared in the wake of the tumultuous decade of the 1960s, a period that included policy advances like the Civil Rights Act and Immigration and Nationality Act. Although on its own, the time horizon of this graph certainly does not prove a direct relation between social inclusivity and high economic growth, it does serve as a reminder that as America has become a more liberal and tolerant society, it has benefited from remarkable economic advancement as well. In this respect, the soul-searching that the U.S. is undergoing in the wake of the twin tragedies of COVID and George Floyd's murder, this actually bodes quite well for America's future geoeconomic prospects. Thanks for watching. Welcome your comments. If you'd like to keep abreast of the Geoeconomics take on world events and directions in markets, technology, and geopolitics, feel free to subscribe.